Namaskar everyone. Yesterday we celebrated Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's 129th birth anniversary. We know that he was born on 14th of April 1891, and in India across the states we are used to celebrating his birthday, his birth anniversary with lot of enthusiasm and exuberance. We hold processions, we hold public gatherings, we hold public meetings, and different kinds of programs. But this year we could not do all that because of the terrible crisis that is unleashed by COVID-19, and the situation is worrisome not only in India but across world. That is why we are avoiding to come in large numbers together. What is that is called as social distancing. In my opinion, that should not be called social distancing but physical distancing. We are trying our best to do away with the practices of social exclusion in our country, and that is why we should not call it social distancing. In our understanding, or for our purpose, we should call it physical distancing. Yes, we could not celebrate Baba Saheb's birth anniversary this year with that, with usual kind of things. But that should not matter. We always can remember him. We can read his book. We can read his books. We can revisit his thoughts, things that he has done for the country, and that is how we can remember him, and we can pay him right tribute. And that is why I think all of us we did that yesterday. And most importantly, what I believe is this digital media has offered us the opportunity to connect to like-minded people, to hold discussions. And yesterday I was watching a lot of Facebook live programs, and also certain meetings on Zoom. And we through our own ways we have tried to talk on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. We have tried to remember him, and we have paid our rich tributes. Now in this discussion also I am trying to utilize this digital media to pay tribute to Baba Saheb, and to remember him on his 129th birth anniversary. Though I did not do that yesterday, but we are used to celebrate not only on 14th of April but for some 15-20 days thereafter also. So in this platform also I'm trying to revisit Baba Saheb's thoughts, and I am paying my humble tribute to this great son of India, who is also called as Vishwamanav. And truly, because the kinds of things he has done, that is not only for relevant for our country, for us, but across the world, across the people who are in desperate situations across the world. And we definitely can call him, and definitely must call him, Vishwamanav. When I in this at this platform now, when I'm discussing, primarily I remember Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, who is a staunch nationalist, and we have listened to some of the criticisms and some of this ill-intentioned arguments about Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, saying he wasn't nationalist enough. We know that Mr. Shauri has written a book called Worshipping False Gods, in which he has tried to project Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar somewhere not nationalist, or somewhere in some notes he had tried to call him a traitor. That is, I think, arrogance from the upper echelons of society he comes from, and that arrogance reflects in his writings. He hasn't understood Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. To understand the nationalism of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, I believe we need to visit his 25th of November 19 49 speech which he made before the Constituent Assembly, the last speech before the Constituent Assembly when it was being adopted. And he has observed some of the very important things which say that he was absolutely nationalist. He was for greater unity of India. He starts with, the opposition to the parliamentary democracy that coming from the communists and the socialist parties. And he says that the communists want to establish dictatorship of proletariat. The dictatorship of proletariat that Marx says that the dictatorship of proletariat then will establish the communism all over the world. So they want to establish the dictatorship of proletariat in India also. The principles of parliamentary democracy will not give them that chance, and that is their resentment. Secondly, he says that the criticism coming from socialists is based on two facts. One is they want to nationalize and socialize the property without any payment of compensation when they come to power. And second thing, by emphasizing on the absoluteness of the fundamental rights, what they are wanting is the absolute freedom for themselves, the unfettered freedom, that is the word he used, the unfettered freedom to criticize the government, to stand against the government, and, and when they will come to power, or even if they do not come to power, they may try and overthrow the government, and they want that absolute in the garb of the fundamental rights. What they want is they want to criticize the government, they want to throw away the government, overthrow the government to establish the socialist state, and that is why they oppose parliamentary democracy. They put so much of emphasis, or not emphasis, but they talk about absoluteness of the fundamental rights. They don't want any sort of limitations on the fundamental rights. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar rejects these criticisms and says, Indian constitution is open enough, facile enough. He says that, the document that has come up is for the present generation. That is the vision of the present generation. And if the coming generations believe that they need certain changes in the constitution, they certainly can do so by amending the constitution, and that provisions are there by amending the constitution. He says that by 2/3 of majority, the constitution can be amended. While explaining all this, he invokes Thomas Jefferson, who is considered to be one of the important figures who drafted American Constitution. And he says that, and I quote the Thomas Jefferson's quote: "We may consider each generation a distinct nation with a right by the will of the majority to bind themselves, but none to bind the succeeding generation more than the inhabitants of the another country." What does he say is, we are binding ourselves together. So what is he trying to say is we are binding ourselves, but we are not binding our coming generation. So he says that Indian constitution also has enough space for the changes to be made in the constitution. And in this he doesn't say, he says that Indian constitution has not applied the seal of finality or infallibility. These are the words, finality or infallibility, on the Indian constitution. So if the coming generations believe that they need certain changes, they can change or they can amend the constitution by 2/3 of majority. And if you come to power with 2/3 of majority, and if you do not come to power, if you do not have 2/3 of majority, then you must understand that you do not represent the will of people. That's what he says. Second important thing that he talks about is the federal structure of India. And he says, the criticism that comes from certain quarters, that it has given so much of powers to the center. It has led to the centralization, and states have been reduced to subsidiaries or municipalities. He says there is no there is not much of substance in such a criticism. And he says that only during emergency certain provisions are there for maintaining national unity, to preserve our independence. Such provisions are necessary. But my understanding, because in some of his constitutional debates, uh, previously he had maintained that the tendency to disintegrate in our country is rampant. He said, that is what he says. The tendency to disintegrate in our country is rampant, and that needs to be curbed. And that is why I think, even for that matter, the Article 1 of the Indian Constitution reads, uh, India, that is Bharat, is union of states. Though we are a federal structure, we do not say India, that is Bharat, is a federation of states. So that's the difference. Why does he say that India, that is Bharat, is union of states? Because he wants the unity of the country to remain intact, given the fact that there were more than 565 princely states, trying to maintain their independence under British suzerainty in our country. And after British have left the country, these were to be integrated. And recently India was partitioned into two countries, and that is why, and therefore I believe that he wanted the center to be strong, to preserve independence, to keep India united. I think that is a staunch nationalist of him. The next important observations that he make is, he says that he observes that we must put our country over our creed. We should not give much of space to our narrow, selfish interest. Country must come first. And he observes that India lost its independence because of the infidelity and treachery of some of its people. It is not that India was always under the foreign rule. It was ruled by somebody else. No, India was independent. India has its glorious past, but we lost our independence because of the infidelity and treachery of certain people. That's what he says, and he gives 5 examples to cite to cite the treachery and the infidelity in the wake of crisis shown by certain important people in our country. First, he cites the example of King Dahir. When he was invaded upon by Muhammad bin Qasim, some of his generals were taking bribes from the agents of Muhammad bin Qasim and were helping him and were not doing anything to save their kingdom from the foreign invasion. And we know, that King Dahir was defeated by Muhammad bin Qasim. Second is, he cites the example of Jaichand and Solanki kings who invited Muhammad Ghori to invade Prithviraj Chauhan, and they offered their help to him, and that led to the defeat of Prithviraj Chauhan. Third important thing that he talks about, and I would like to repeat some of the words that he has used when he's citing third example, since he also happens to come from the state of Maharashtra. He says, when King Shivaji Maharaj, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, was fighting against Mughals for the liberation of Hindus, these are the words that he uses, for the liberation of Hindus, the other Maratha noblemen and the Rajput kings were fighting alongside the Mughals, and that was a treachery. The fourth example he cites is when British were trying to destroy the Sikh kingdom. Their principal commander Gulab Singh he sat idly. He did not do anything to save the Sikh kingdom from that destruction, and rest is history. And then finally, the fifth example he cites is the events of 1857, when the large parts of India were rebelling against British, were fighting against British for their independence, for the Swaraj. The Sikh kings did not do anything. They sat and just watched. So he says that this is a treachery, And if we continue to do that even after independence, it would be really difficult for us to preserve our independence. Therefore, he says that we must keep our national interest. We must give our national interest primacy, and our selfish interests must be avoided, must be kept aside. And he applies this principle not only to individuals, but primarily he's applying this principle to the political parties. And sometimes when we see the things that are happening in our country today, we find him more relevant than before. Then he talks about that on 26th of January 1950, India is going to be an independent country. India has become independent in 1947, but India is going to be a democratic country on 26th of January 1950. And then he says that he has abiding interest and abiding faith in the glorious past of India. He says that there were republics in India before also. Since antiquity, there were republics, or even if there were monarchies, they were limited, and the monarch was elected by people themselves. That's what he says. Then he talks about Buddhist Bhikshu Sanghas. He says that Buddhist Bhikshu Sanghas in India used to have parliaments for themselves. They used to hold deliberations on the lines of the deliberations that happen in modern day parliamentary democracies. So we had all of them. So that is why we have certain level of experience since ancient times into democracies, and we must keep up with that. And he says that then he talks about the constitutional methods. Now, availability of constitutional methods, which was not a case before. So, he says that things like, civil disobedience, satyagraha, non-cooperation, these things had their utility when we did not have constitutional methods, when we were under foreign rule. But now that's not a case. We have become independent, we have constitutional methods, and we must avoid such methods, because he says these things, the things like civil disobedience, non-cooperation, or satyagraha lead to the what he calls them as grammar of anarchy. He calls them as grammar of anarchy. He is totally against bloody revolutionary methods, primarily propagated by the communists. He is against that, and that is why. And the next observation he makes is, he talks about, on this day, when we are accepting the principles of democracy, we are entering into, when we have become independent, when we are accepting constitution, we are entering into the phase of contradictions. And he says that, politically we are equal, but socially and economically we are going to be unequal. If politically we have accepted that one man, one vote, and one vote, one value, but socially there is so much of that value is not the case. So if this contradiction is not done away with, it would be really difficult for us to maintain our independence or to continue with our democratic experiment. And that is why he gives importance. He talks about the Trinity principles of equality, liberty, and fraternity. He says that liberty without equality would lead to the establishment of the supremacy of the few, and the same would be the case with the fraternity also. When he talks about fraternity, for him fraternity means a sense of common brotherhood of all Indian, if Indians being one people. So that feeling is to be improved. That's what he talks about. So he gives primacy to the Trinity principles of equality, liberty, equality, and fraternity, and all these principles were interconnected. Then when we were talking about when he was responding to the criticism of centralization the center becoming very important and strong, and the states getting reduced to municipalities. Yes, he may not have accepted that criticism, but he arranged and he was in support of that, because I remember in 1956 the State Reorganization Commission was established. We know that Potti Ramalu, a congressman from Andhra Pradesh, a Telugu speaking region of the state of Madras of that time, who sat on fast for 52 days, I suppose, and he died, and there were some violent agitations. And then the State Reorganization Commission was established, and the states were to be reorganized on the basis of languages. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar was against such reorganization because he believed that that would be the death knell on the India's unity, national unity. In 1956, he wrote a book called Thoughts on Linguistic States, and that time he was keeping very unwell. We know that on 6th of December 1956 he passed away 2 months after he was converted to Buddhism. But he still took out time and he expressed his concerns against reorganizing of the states on the principles of languages, that because that would essentially lead to the disintegration. Then he says that states can be reorganized on the linguistic basis, but states must not be like the present day Maharashtra. He talks about dividing it present day Maharashtra in three parts, east, south, and the west, I think, so that when the states are reorganized in different the states, people speaking the same language have different states. They will not have that, they will not talk for the secession from the state. So it shows how much he was concerned about national unity, India's unity, the united India, and it shows how staunch nationalist he was. The another aspect of he being a staunch nationalist is his conversion to Buddhism. Now we must remember that in 1935 at Yeola conference he had pronounced that though I am born as Hindu, I am not going to die as Hindu. And why did he say so? I would quote. He says, and I quote, "So long as we remain in a religion which teaches a man to treat another man like a leper, the sense of discrimination on account of caste, which is deeply rooted in our minds, cannot go. For annihilating caste and untouchables, change of religion is the only antidote." So in 1935, he pronounced